Hi guys, welcome to Funhouse. Today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to look at the new Our Fantasy Top Novels 2025 results. This is a poll that Reddit does every 2 years on the top fantasy and science fiction novels. There's a few non-fantasy science fiction novels that sneak in every once in a while, but mostly it's fantasy and a little bit of science fiction. And I've already looked at this list, so this isn't going to be a reaction video. This is just going to be kind of collecting my thoughts on the list and what I think about the various placements on this year's perspective. So without further ado, let's dive in. I have some thoughts already and some other ones that I'll just kind of do off the cuff. All right, we'll look at the top. We'll look at the top five to start. Number one, back on top is Middle Earth Universe. I'm a fan of this. It's not my actual number one, but I think it is the most influential and important fantasy series still to this day, and I think that means something. And I think that that's a thing that should be rewarded. And I have no qualm seeing Middle Earth at number one. It's the OG. It's the Godfather. It is the genesis of modern fantasy, and it's still a ripping good story. So number two is the First Law world. I like First Law. It's not my favorite series. I've only read the first trilogy, and I finished that up this year. And it took me a few years to get through even that trilogy because I was a little slow on going through it. It's a series that I definitely like. I don't quite have it in the high esteem that the rest of the fantasy community does, as far as like it being number two on my list. It's much lower. But I did like it a lot. The character works really good in First Law, and I think that's why it resonates with so many people. For me, the plotting and world building holds the series back just a little bit. But I don't have any problems with it being this high because I know a lot of people really like it. It's just not there for me necessarily. At number three is my personal number one, Song of Ice and Fire. I grew up on Song of Ice and Fire. I read this in high school and was very, very, very into these books. I've read them multiple times each. These are my favorite fantasy books, um, pretty easily, I think. So I'm happy to see them sort of creeping back up the list. I think the show's disappointing ending and the never-ending saga of the fact that they're not going to be finished holds them back from being, a potential threat to Tolkien at number one with the general community. But I, despite all of that, I still love this series, and I'm really happy to see it this high. At number four, and most interestingly in the top five, we have the Stormlight Archive, which has dropped 3 spots from number one last time they did this list. I have a lot of thoughts about this. So buckle up. This is gonna be a longer entry compared to the first three. Um, Let me just start with what I think about Stormlight Archive and Brandon Sanderson generally in a vacuum, and then let's kind of contextualize that in the broader community reaction to Wind and Truth. So, Sanderson, I like Sanderson. I've read quite a bit of Sanderson at this point. I'm not a Sanderson completionist by any stretch, but I think I've read like 9 books by him because I've read the 5 Stormlight books, I've read the first Mistborn book, and I've read the 3 Wheel of Time books. So that comes out to 9 Sanderson books that I've read, which is a lot of books for one author. There's not that many authors that I've read 9 books by. I'm not as well read as some of the people who've been doing BookTube for years, but uh, I like Sanderson. I don't love Sanderson. I think he's very good. I've never quite gotten him as a number one fantasy author of all time, much less having 2 series in the top 10, which we'll get to a little bit later. I just, and Stormlight in particular is a series that I like but don't love. It's quite a bit further down on my personal list, to be honest. And I share the general community reaction to Wind and Truth. I thought Wind and Truth was quite bad. I didn't think it delivered on the promises of the first 4 books. I thought it was too long. I thought it needed editing. I thought that it got way too wrapped up in um, like kind of modern language and concepts that sort of distracted from the fantasy of it all. So I share almost all the critiques of Wind and Truth that the general community has. Sorry, there's somebody doing construction outside or something, so I apologize if there's some noise in the background. Um, all that being said, I've been a little put off by the backlash to Sanderson based on Wind and Truth. And here's why. Like, let's I keep reading these posts by people who claim to be Sanderson fans, who and I believe them that they have been Sanderson fans up till Wind and Truth, who say things like, I've been reading Sanderson all this time. I've read all Mistborn. I've read all of Stormlight. I've read the standalones. I've read blah, 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 blah. I hate Sanderson now because Wind and Truth is bad. I've seen YouTube videos that say things like, fans hate Sanderson now, and things like that. Or, I'm not reading any more Sanderson. I'm done with Stormlight Archive. I'm done with Sanderson. I'm not going further after this book. And to me, if you've read 10 to 20 books by an author, which is a completely plausible number of books for a Sanderson fan to have read of Brandon Sanderson, because this guy writes a lot of books. Like, that's not even half his catalog, I don't think. If you've read 10 to 20 books by Brandon Sanderson and you've loved every second of it, and he writes one book you don't like, that doesn't invalidate the other 20 books that you read that you liked. Everybody writes bad books. Everybody writes bad books. I've never read a series that doesn't have a bad book buried in it somewhere, unless it's like a trilogy. But a longer series, a series that goes beyond like 3 or 4 books, like there's always a bad book buried in there somewhere. It's really, really hard to write good books. It's a miracle when somebody writes as many good books as Brandon Sanderson does. And I say that as somebody who's not a Sanderson fanboy. I think Sanderson's very good, but he's not my favorite. I In some ways, I'm happy to see Stormlight dropping a little bit, just because I don't think it really deserved to be number one in the first place. But the reason that's dropping is a little crazy to me, which is, and we'll look through the rest of this list, so you'll see Sanderson dropping constantly throughout the rest of the list. And the fan reactions to Sanderson, where they're like, I'm not reading him anymore, even though I've read 20 of his books. Just slow your roll. He wrote one bad book, and I agree it's a bad book. I'm not disagreeing with your reaction to that book. I'm disagreeing to the idea that one bad book taints an author for life, because that's just not realistic. People who write as much as Brandon Sanderson do are going to have bad books. That's just inevitable. I think of authors that like don't have bad books. I mean, like the only thing that comes to mind is somebody like Katsuo Ishiguro, who writes like one book every decade and it's like 250 pages, right? Like that's the type of author that writes a perfectly polished book every time out of the gate. But I don't think you want to read an author, if you're reading Brandon Sanderson, I don't think you want to read an author that only puts out one short book every 10 years. Like that's just not what you're in this game for. So if you're going to ask a guy to put out the content and the volume of content that Sanderson does, you've got to give him some grace along the way for some books not landing as well as you want to. I mean, God forbid you ever pick up Wheel of Time and use the I'm not reading if I read a bad book criteria, because I mean, Wind and Truth is bad, but like it's got nothing on Crossroads of Twilight. Um, even series I really like there are bad books scattered through the longer series. It's just a thing. So I think people need to really calm down with the Sanderson backlash. If you love Sanderson through 20 books and book number 21 didn't do it for you, you should pick up book 22. Or don't, live your life. But I think getting angry that an author put out a bad book after so many books that you really, really enjoy in a row up till that bad book is just like toxic fan behavior, and we shouldn't act that way, in my opinion. So that is my long, relatively hottish take on Brandon Sanderson and the Stormlight Archive. I'm. It's funny because like directionally, I agree with all of this. I agree that Wind and Truth is bad. I agree that Stormlight should drop a little bit. I think it was a little overhyped. Um, but I just can't get behind the vitriol of the backlash that I've been seeing on Reddit and BookTube in the last like 3 months. Okay, number 5 is Realm of the Elderlings. I really, really enjoyed the Fitz trilogy, the first Fitz trilogy, when I read it back in like high school, and then I never followed up with the follow up series. And I this is one I'd love to get to at some point. I really would. It's just intimidating because there's like 16 books, and I don't remember the Fitz trilogy well enough, so I'd probably have to restart from scratch on this one. But I'm happy to see it this high because I really did like that Fitz trilogy back in the day. Okay, let's look at the next five. We have Malazan, which I just put a video up on Friday. I finished this last week, and I loved it. Loved the series. I think Malazan is one of the great fantasy series. Very happy to see it jump 3 spots. A little surprised to see it this high, honestly, because it's a very difficult series to read, and I'm surprised it has enough support. The people who read Malazan love Malazan. I'm surprised there's enough Malazan readers to vault it this high. Obviously the intensity of the love for Malazan is there. It's just I'm surprised the breadth of the fan base is big enough to put it all the way to number 6. When it was at number 8, I was not as surprised, and I don't. That's not a big jump, but it is a jump. Number 7 is Wheel of Time. I have mixed feelings on Wheel of Time. Overall, I'm very happy I read it. I think it is a like standard of fantasy, and I think it earns its spot here. I did not always find it enjoyable to read, to be perfectly frank. There were times reading it that I was very frustrated with what was going on the page. I think most Wheel of Time fans will grant you that. But the overall arc of the series, the overall quality of it, I think was definitely worth the read, and I don't really begrudge it at spot. Discworld. I'd love to read more Discworld. I've only read one Discworld book. I think it's called Reaper Man. I read it a long time ago. Really liked it. Thought it was great. Definitely happy to see Discworld this high. And it's one that I really want to read more of. Mistborn, as I said earlier, I've read the first Mistborn book, and I like it. I actually like the Mistborn book I read more than the Stormlight books I've read. Um, I I'm going to continue with the series at some point. I just have other priorities that are a little higher than continuing with Mistborn. But at some point, I'll my voice cracked. At some point, I will continue down the Mistborn road because I did really enjoy the first book. And then finally, the Greenbone Saga, one of my faves. So happy to see it jump this high so quickly. I think the general positive fan reaction to Greenbone Saga is totally deserved and totally earned, and it's always exciting when the cream rises to the top. And I think Greenbone Saga is one of the best fantasy series ever written. Okay, I scrolled a little further ahead this time, but we'll look at the top 20 now. Number 11, Red Rising. I have not actually read Red Rising. I think next year I'm going to try to get to Red Rising once the series wraps, and I can read the whole thing. I'm a little intimidated by it, just because like Hunger Games in space. Even though I like Hunger Games in space for the first book doesn't sound that interesting to me. But I've heard it gets really good after that, so I'm excited to crack into Red Rising. I'm just a little. It's kind of held me at arm's length up till this point because of the description of the first book. Harry Potter. I don't begrudge Harry Potter being here. I like Harry Potter. I have it a little lower on my list. Obviously, the author is a nightmare person, and that is what it is. Um, the series is in importance in the fantasy canon probably deserves to be higher. In quality, probably should be lower. So I think 12 is not a bad place for it to settle into. Gentleman Bastard. I've read the first book, Lies Locke Lamora, one of my favorite fantasy books. It works so good. The reason I haven't kept going with the series is because I think Lies Locke Lamora works great as a standalone, and I'd rather at this point read a perfect standalone than an unfinished series. That logic makes sense in my head. I know it's a little weird, but yeah, I feel like if I read the next couple books, I'll be disappointed that the series isn't going to continue or is unlikely to continue. And right now, it just exists in my head as this like perfectly carved single entry, and I'm happy with that. Piranesi is great. Piranesi, whatever it is. Uh, very tickled to see it this high on the list, sort of nestled in with all of these like Titan like long series. Uh, and then you got this one cute little book that's just the little book that could, charging its way up the list. So very happy to see Piranesi this high. Dune. Dune is my white whale. I have started Dune 3 times, and life has gotten in the way 3 times, and I've put it down and not picked it back up over the course of my life. This year, I am committed to reading Dune and at least a couple of the sequels, because I really liked what I read of Dune. I just kept having like other things in life come up that kept me from finishing it. Earthsea Cycle. I read part of the first book and bounced. I like Ursula K. Le Guin in general, but I think Earthsea felt a little too classical and a little too like young mage in training when I read it. Though honestly, I barely remember what I read. I just remember that I wasn't really feeling it when I was getting into it a few years back. So someday I'll give that another shot. Dungeon Crawler Carl. Here's the thing about Crawler Carl. I wanted to give this a real shot. I did. I got the audiobook because I heard the audiobook was good, and the narrator is very good in the audiobook. I made it about 20% of the way through before I bounced. And the thing about Dungeon Crawler Carl is too much of the book felt like somebody was just explaining the rules of video games to me. And here's the thing. I know the rules of video games. I know what a loot box is. I know what leveling up is. I didn't need to spend literal hours of my life having those concepts explained to me in excruciating detail. I'm sure once you get past the first like quarter of the book, that dies down a little bit. And I almost pushed through just on that logic, but I just got to a point where I was just sitting there for hours listening to this narrator be like, if you equip an item, you'll have more power. And I was just like, I know. I've been playing video games for 30 years. I understand how they work. This is a novelization of a video game. I get it. Let's just move on to the fighting. And it never happened. And that just got to a point where I just couldn't listen to it anymore. There were too many other priorities on my list. So I'll come back to it someday. I don't really begrudge it being here. I know a lot of people love this book and this series, but it just wasn't for me from what I could see from the first 100 pages or so. King Killer Chronicle. I read the first book of this. I really liked it when I read it, 10 years ago or so. And I didn't really continue with the series because I was very busy at that time in my life and I just didn't have time to like read series. I had time to read books. And then all the controversy with Rothfuss started with him not finishing, with him like maybe bilking a charity. It's a little hard to say based on, some people say yes, some people say no. I don't really know. I haven't had any real interest in continuing with the series after all that. Also, I share some of the criticisms of Kavoth as being just a Gary Sue sort of character that is perfect in every way from the get-go, and that was sort of annoying. Locked Tomb. I just picked up the first book of this yesterday, and I'm about 10% of the way through. I'm enjoying it okay so far. We'll see how I feel as it goes on. Cradle, bounced pretty hard off Cradle. I read a couple chapters and I was just like, no, I can tell already this is not going to be my thing. So that was my experience with Cradle. I'm going to move a little faster now that we're out of the top 20. So I do want to like talk about, the list as a whole. Murderbot's not my thing. Wandering In I haven't read. Broken Earth I really love. Sad to see it drop. Sun Eater I'm getting to this year. This year it's one of my priority reads. The Expanse I bounced off of like 10 years ago, but I've always wanted to go back because I think I would probably like it if I gave it my attention. Austin Art, I may have read one of these books when I was a kid, but I don't really remember, so I don't count it. Jonathan Strange, haven't read, but I think I'm going to get to it this year or next year. It's on my priority list. Dresden Files, I have not read. I don't know if I'll ever read. It sounds appealing in broad strokes, but there's so many books, and even the fans seem mixed on it at times. And some of the things I've heard about it kind of turned me off. So I don't know. At some point I'll read Dresden. Hierarchy. I started this a couple years ago and bounced. But I liked what I read. I could just see it going the academia route, and that's not really my thing. And so once it kind of started heading in that direction, I got less interested. But I want to come back to reading these books because everybody loves them. Sarantine Universe. I haven't read any Guy Gavriel K. I really want to rectify that at some point. Hainish Cycle. I believe the Hainish Cycle includes Left Hand of Darkness, and if that's true, I've read Left Hand of Darkness and really liked it. Broken Earth. I have not read. Chronicles of Osreth, I have not read. I think that's Goblin Emperor and its progeny, but I'm not sure. Second Apocalypse, I have not read. Cosmere, lots of people have talked about this. It's weird it's here as its own entry. I think that's just a reflection of people not following instructions. Because the instructions were not to include Cosmere as its own entry, and I think enough people did, and they didn't want to discount those votes entirely, so they just put it as its own thing. Yeah, I don't know. His Dark Materials. I love His Dark Materials. Witcher. I read the first book of The Witcher and I thought it was okay. Love the video game though. Witcher 3. Haven't read Black Company. Solar Cycle. I started like 10 years ago and then got busy and kind of drifted off from it. But I liked what I was reading when I was reading it, and I'd like to come back to it. Dark Tower is one of my all-time favorites. Top 10 for me. I'm sad to see it drop 16 spots. I think, it's not classic fantasy. It's sort of weird fantasy, and so I think that hurts it in this type of list. Also, it's uneven. Some of the books are better than others. Scholomance I haven't read. Hyperion Cantos is my number two series of all time and favorite sci-fi series of all time. If you haven't read Hyperion, the first two Hyperion Cantos in particular, go read Hyperion. It's so good. So good. Haven't gotten to Project Hail Mary yet, but I really want to. Dandelion Dynasty is literally my next project. It's queued up for next month. And Sword of Kaigen, I've read like a couple chapters just to kind of get a taste of it. And I think I'm going to get to it in full this year. Haven't read World of the Five Gods. Spirit Cuts Through Water, I want to get through this year. Wayfarers, I haven't read and don't have a lot of interest. Rhaenyra, I haven't read. One Piece, I haven't read. Banished Lands, I have not read. And I bounced off his other series very quickly. Verkozigen Saga, I don't know if I'm saying that right or not, haven't read. Blood Over Brighthaven, priority for the next couple years, assuming I like Sword of Kagan, which, based on the universal reaction of Sword of Kagan, I think I will. Ender's Saga is top 10 series for me. I haven't read the whole thing, but based just on Ender's Game and Ender's Shadow, it's one of my favorites. Haven't read Kushiel, haven't read The Masquerade, haven't read Shadow of the Leviathan, though I think I'll get to that this year or next year. I just read the first Texkalon book, thought it was okay. This Is How You Lose the Time War, priority for this year. Children of Time, probably next year I'll get to that. I really want to read Children of Time. New Chrobazone, really want to read this. I don't know when I'll get to it, but it's definitely on my radar. Remembrance of Earth's Past, I don't know, Tortle. Remembrance of Earth's Past is a top 10 series for me. I think it's brilliant. I understand the complaints and the criticisms, but I think the ideas are so good that it deserves all the hype of the people who hype it. Hitchhikers is a top 10 for me. Funny stuff. Love it. I'm going to stop doing every entry at this point because we're starting to get out of the ones that I've definitely read. Tigana, I want to get to. The Band, I want to get to. Powder Mage, I want to get to. I already said Left Hand of Darkness. Interesting that it's on here because I think it's also part of the Hainish cycle. Circe is brilliant. Narnia's gotten underrated at this point. Like, I understand why it's dropping, but it's an OG classic for a reason, and I read it as a kid and I really liked it. I really want to get to Bound and the Broken. Imperial Ratch, underrated series. I've only read the first book, but I thought it was brilliant. Want to read Between Two Fires. Want to read The Dispossessed. Want to read Frankenstein at some point. Want to read Song of Achilles. Might get to that this year. Tide Child sounds great. Wars of Light and Shadow I keep hearing about recently, and I'm very intrigued. And that's the top 100, and I think I'm going to cut it off there because there's 250 books on this list. We're getting past the point where I've read most of them. I don't want to just scroll through the entire list and just spewing out random. I want to read this. I want to read this. But yeah, that's my overall take on the top 100 books, book series of our fantasy this year. I think it's a really interesting list. and I'm curious what you guys think about it. That's all from me. Just a reminder, link in the comments. You can buy my book, The Quantum Entanglement. Uh, it's on Amazon. It's a good time. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe.